Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, an ESPN stats and researcher, I guess you could say, and he works with
Yeah.
so many great shows for ESPN, such as Sports Center and NBA Countdown, previously The Jump. He's done so much with ESPN. We're so excited to talk to Michael Schwartz today. Michael, we appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad you are able to be here because you have done so many great things throughout your career. And I'm kind of excited for you to speak about all of those great things and maybe give some advice to some younger broadcasters as well, like myself, or journalists or researchers. We'd love to kind of get in the position that you're at. I want to go back to even before the beginning of your career. When did you realize you wanted to even work in the sports media world? And what has been your career path since to get to this point?
Probably in high school, I found out there was a school paper, and I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awesome. I can be the sports editor and just write about the Diamondbacks. I'm old enough, that was when they were winning the 2001 World Series, was when I was in high school. Not exactly when I was at the newspaper, but that was the kind of uh, era. And I just had such a great time with it. I started writing for a local paper called the Scottsdale Views. I'm from Scottsdale, Arizona, and thought, wow, this is like what I'm doing for fun, anyways, watching sports and talking about it. I used to love, again, to date me, on the old there used to be message boards that were kind of like Twitter before Twitter, where you could go
Right.
on and just argue about sports with other people. Now we have Twitter, or X, for that. So that was when I first found out, wow, that could be my career. I kind of dove headfirst into it and made sports journalism certainly the main thing I was going after in college then.
Yeah, and you kind of did go after that in college. We're going to break down and literally just right now, actually, what you did at Arizona, because I think that's kind of when you realized at that point, or not when you realized, but I'm sure when you understood how good you were at sports journalism, and it's kind of helped shape you into the media professional you are today. You were named one of the top 100 journalists in the
Yeah,
country for U-Wire for
yeah.
your work covering the Arizona men's basketball team, and so that's not an honor most people can receive. I want to ask you just about how that experience, how your success there kind of helped shape your sports media career afterwards.
Yeah, actually pretty directly. So, yeah, I covered Arizona basketball in 06, 07, and 07, 08. 07, 08 was the year legendary head coach Lute Olson took a leave of absence in the preseason and missed the whole year. And it was just an incredible experience getting to cover that. I sent some Freedom of Information requests to try to figure out what was going on. I looked at Coach Olson's contract and then the contract of Kevin O'Neill, who was the associate head coach who ended up becoming the head coach for that season, and the bump he got up, and all sorts of interesting things like that. And my work covering largely that story, because that was really the story of the year in Arizona athletics in 07, 08, in my senior year. And then also, I had a couple internships with MLB.com. In 07, I covered the Diamondbacks. 08, I covered the Dodgers. And there was a ESPN editor by the name of Kevin Arnovitz, who you guys might know since he's been on our NBA shows a lot in the meantime. And he was starting a blog network called the True Hoop Network. And he was recruiting people, both old established blogs and people like me who were kind of just coming out of college, who had an affinity for a certain team, for me, the Phoenix Suns. And so what I was doing in college and seeing, the kind of work I was doing on the Lute Olson story on top of the Dodgers. He happened to be a Dodger fan, so he happened to see my work on Dodgers.com, led directly to starting Valley of the Suns, and that's kind of what has led to everything else in my career.
Right, Valley of the Sun's an affiliate with ESPN, and we're going to break that down in just a minute. But you kind of mentioned doing some of these internships, and at 13 years
Yeah,
old, I'm not currently at the age to where internships are something that I can do. You could still get many great experiences, but internships seem to be more something in like high school and college. For a high school
sure.
or college aspiring broadcaster or journalist listening to this, explain how important these internships are and the fundamentals that you learn in your career that help kind of shape the rest of your work in sports media.
Yeah, I'd say almost the number one thing is in getting any job, not just sports journalism, but just any job, period. But I guess I'd say, especially in sports journalism, is who you know. So, like, how I got this job at ESPN really was thanks to the 6 years I did as an affiliate of ESPN, where I knew the whole editorial team for ESPN NBA at the time, and they were able to vouch for me. There's so many people applying to ESPN, as I'm sure you can imagine, that having somebody in the company that was trusted by the group that I'm with now was just so valuable. So that's the number one thing, really, from the networking standpoint. And like, I get people every so often who I'll do an informational interview with, which I'm always happy to do. But then they want me to vouch for them for an ESPN job. It's like, hey man, I don't know you. Like, if if I knew
Right.
you, if I worked with you, if I saw your work, if I was in the trenches with you, which obviously I was as a affiliate in the True Hoop Network, they could vouch for who I was as a person, and as a writer, an editor, all that stuff. So that's probably the number one biggest thing, having people in positions of somewhat power who can vouch for you. And then, of course, number two is just the skills and the experience you learn. And even you see what you do and what you don't like to do. So, like, during the Dodgers internship, I filled in, I mainly just covered home games for those teams, but the main reporter had to take, I think, his daughter to college or something like that. So I got to do one road trip, and I was so burnt out by the end of it. And this is me, 22 years old, no wife, no kids, no family or anything like that. And just thinking, like, man, these baseball reporters do this every other week. They're going on the road. I just couldn't imagine doing that part. That kind of let me see, like, this is fun, but I don't know if being a beat reporter is necessarily the exact uh, place you want to be. And then even, I got my job at ESPN through an internship. So it was kind of like a 10-week job interview where I got to see if I liked it. They got to see if they liked me. And I truly do feel like these internships can be two-way streets where you can see, obviously they're
Right.
evaluating you. That's kind of the thing that everyone knows about, but you're also evaluating them, see if you fit in the culture, see if you enjoy doing the work that you'd be doing there.
They always say, like, you don't know whether you like or dislike something until you actually try it. And that's why,
Absolutely.
I mean, that really is the main thing you get from these internships. Obviously, connections is a big thing, but you really get to understand what it's like to be in the trenches and be like a reporter. And you essentially, it's like getting a snippet of what these people will have to do, and if that's a career path you kind of want to go down. So I find internships very fascinating. Once I get to that age, that will be something I 100% will pursue, and I know so many people in the broadcasting world who have pursued those kinds of internships. And then when it comes to connections, there are so many great databases. I mean, I at
Mhm.
first connected with you on LinkedIn, and that's how we're doing this podcast right now. And like those kind of databases and those types of platforms to where people can connect and build working relationships and stuff like this and talk about sports, but also from a career standpoint as well. All these great things are so important, I believe, when it comes to the broadcasting world, I guess you could say. I do want to go back to
Sure.
that ESPN affiliate Suns
Yeah.
blog that you wrote for covering the team for almost 6 years.
Yeah.
Oh, we just talked about kind of being in the trenches, learning what it's like to be in different situations. How did covering the Suns for that blog kind of help you understand the way that ESPN operates? Because just from the way I see it, if you got to be that successful, I'm sure it's also not going to be the least stressful job, if that makes sense. I'm sure it's going to have
Yeah.
some stress and some really hard work. So explain to me kind of what you learned while covering the Suns for that blog affiliated with ESPN that kind of helped you understand what ESPN is all about and the work they do.
Yeah, so that was probably my favorite 6 years of my career, to be honest. And it wasn't even I had a day job too. I worked for an internet marketing company in Phoenix. So I wasn't again, I since I was an affiliate, I wasn't an ESPN employee at the
Right.
time. I did get to write for ESPN. Like, they used to have these daily dimes and 5-on-5. So like during the 2010 playoffs, when the Suns were playing the Lakers in the West Finals, I got to contribute some work. They did these 5-on-5 things where they'd ask like five of us 5 questions about the NBA. So I'd get to chime in on those from time to time. So I had a relationship with ESPN, but I wasn't working directly for the company at that point. But I learned so much. I mean, I used to call it, I did go to grad school now, but at the time I called it my personal grad school. I learned how to do video because that was something I didn't really do in college. So um, as far as taping a lot of the post game interviews and using software to put that together. I learned most tangibly for my career now. I really learned advanced stats and how to play around with them. I've certainly always been statistically inclined, but I did all sorts of stuff with lineup data and looking at, hey, when Channing Frye's on the court with these guys versus Jaron Collins, how much better the offense is, because they'd start Jaron Collins just as kind of a placeholder, even though Frye was certainly much more effective. So just looking at those kind of things and using that in my writing, kind of the way I looked at it at the time was kind of what I see the Athletic is now, where I mean, back then, like when I was in journalism school, you'd learn like you do a game story and it's kind of formulaic. And for
Right.
me, like I remember one time, I think Danny Granger hit a, you remember Danny Granger?
Yeah, of
It was a
course. Yeah, yeah.
while I think it was Danny Granger, yeah, for the Pacers. And he hit a game-winning three with like 9/10 of a second left. And I did like the first 600 words of the article just on the breakdown that sort of went on that allowed the Pacers' best shooter an open game-winning three-pointer. Um, and I mean, I did a story on the Suns' incredible training staff that at the time was so famed for keeping a lot of older guys, most notably Steve Nash, healthy. And I was my own boss, so I was able to kind of write about whatever I want, whatever I thought was interesting. And honestly, what I'm almost most proud of from that point of my career is the people who I was able to bring into the blog. I mean, we didn't make a lot of money, so I certainly wasn't paying anybody too much. It was largely a experience factor and being able to go in and be credentialed to cover a professional basketball team that at least
Of
at the
course,
beginning
yeah.
of that tenure was pretty good. They were somewhat mediocre by the end of it. But I hired a guy named Mike Schmitz when he was a 18-year-old freshman at the University of Arizona. You know who that guy is now?
Yeah.
He's the assistant general manager of the Portland Trailblazers and was on ESPN for a while. So he was doing free work for me basically for years, and he was fantastic. I've never seen a work ethic like that guy, so I'm not really surprised that he reached the heights that he did. So um,
It's
yeah,
awesome.
that was a awesome time, and again, like financially, it that blog never was that successful, but by any other metric, what I learned, um, the people I was able to, I guess, graduate through that, and the experience we all got, it was incredibly successful.
You said you kinda called it your personal, grad school at the time because you
Yeah,
learned so many different skills, and what I find so interesting when looking through your resume and your experience and the things you've done in your career is, like, your entire career hasn't just been working in stats or working in journalism. It hasn't been very set in stone what you're doing. That's a lot of times what it is, when you get into the sports media world, is you kinda take any opportunity that's available and you learn how to
right.
be versatile. It's one of the key pieces of advice that I have gotten. Now, there are a few jobs I really want to talk about that kind of show your versatility. One of which was when you did some work with the USFL. This was before
Yeah.
they got abolished, and then obviously they came back. Now they're merged to become the UFL with the XFL. But what was the most successful tactic you used? Because you did some social media with them, and obviously the NFL is like the top league. It's going to take over all the football coverage, if you will, and all the football attention on social media. So, what was the most successful tactic you used to not limit the NFL's audience, because the NFL's audience is really never going to get limited, but to more add audience to the league that you covered and the league that you were really trying to advertise and hype up?
So it was it was an interesting time. It was when I was in grad school. It was in 2013. So the league actually wasn't back yet.
Okay.
It was actually it was yeah, it's kind of one of the a funny wrinkle in my life. So when I was in grad school, they were very encouraging you to do internships even within the program. I did the San Diego State Sports MBA program, and they were based in San Diego. They actually had one of their executives come speak to us. It was basically like a two-person operation. There was a lawyer in San Diego, and then there was an executive who used to work for the Ravens slash Browns. They might have been the Browns at the time. I think he might have not gotten to Baltimore when they moved back in the mid '90s, but at the time it was just trying to kind of get some viability. At the time it still wasn't known if the league was going to be able to come back. So yeah, I basically just helped them out with some website stuff, some social media type things, because they were very much not savvy to those types of things, and help them secure their website. And since I'd worked for an SEO company, like kind of look at some of the SEO type of things that would be important. So yeah, that was definitely an interesting time.
I'm sure it was, and that's kind of what you have to deal with, though, with some of these situations. And you do internships, you kind of have to come on and take over a lot, and you don't know how successful that's going to be or the success that will come out of it. But obviously, you take that opportunity, and it definitely turns out that your real graduate school, your what you call your graduate school, doing the Suns blog, it all kind of led you to this role that you have right now, working with ESPN stats. And to me, that's so interesting because anyone watching, you're always like, wow, how do they get that information so
Hmm.
quickly? And as a sports content researcher like you are, it's people like you who are able to figure that out and make those graphics and make the stats understandable for the analyst, the reporter, or the host, or if it's a graphic as well, just to make sure the audience can understand some of this information and understand the magnitude of some of these historic records, if you will. Break down all the great things you do as a sports content researcher for ESPN, some of the roles you've had, some of the shows you work on, just overall what you do for ESPN in your particular role.
Yeah, you broke it down well at the top. I basically worked on every NBA show, even when I started out in Bristol, Connecticut, obviously where ESPN's headquartered, and I worked on shows like NBA Tonight back then, and then I moved out to Los Angeles around the time that the Jump started in 2016. So I was a primary, I'd say the Jump in NBA Today now, which essentially is the same show. It just kind of had a rebranding when Rachel Nichols left
Right.
in 2021. That's pretty much been my main role. But all researchers work on Sports Center. We do the late night Sports Center out in Los Angeles. It was hosted by Neil Everett and Stan Verrett for years. Neil obviously doesn't work for the company anymore, so but Stan's still there. And then NBA Countdown, I've done a lot of. So yeah, I like to think of my role as we're kind of the brains behind the scenes. So the number one thing that we do that you would see as an audience is the stat graphics. Uh, I'm not a visual design type guy. They have a bunch of templates for us, and we basically just fill in the numbers. And next most important thing for sure, perhaps number one most important, is prepping the talent. So like when I work on NBA Today, I'm sitting down with Shanae Agumake before the show. I'm going through her takes, trying to, kind of needle it a little bit to see if there's any things that she could say in a better way, or is there some stat that she can give me? And even in the middle of the show, she'll text me and say, hey, when was the last time this happened, or something, just to give a little bit more oomph to whatever she is talking about. Um, and then also helping with her breakdowns. So like I'll often go through with the producer on a site called Second Spectrum and look for the exact plays that they want to break down. So like if we wanted to see like James Harden going right, obviously he's a left-handed and incredible left-handed player. But if we wanted to see what happens when teams force him right, Second Spectrum can show that to us. We can watch a bunch of plays, and we can um, kind of use those for the breakdown, and then I'll sit with Shanae and kind of give her some of the stats that we would need for that. So overall, and then also certainly checking scripts, making sure everything's accurate, helping come up with ideas either for segments or just like they might say, hey, we just need something on LeBron here, and it'll be up to me to decide what we should do on LeBron. And then you hit on one thing, I'd say certainly over the 10 years that I've been at ESPN, that's changed a lot. And that's sort of challenging is you want to push the limits to some degree and have like smart content that like I'd like to think what separates us is that we do have so many resources that allow us to kind of push really smart type angles, but then also there's a lot of talk about lowest common denominator where there's always people who just want to open up a beer and enjoy sports and they don't necessarily need all sorts of crazy numbers. So just kind of give them the simple stuff, or just, hey, LeBron just pass this guy for whatever record, and give them kind of the simpler type fare. So it's definitely, you want to do a mix of both. I'd say the biggest challenge to me is getting talent to buy in, because if talent doesn't understand what you're talking about or isn't bought into it, they're not going to explain it in a way that will be good for the viewer. So I'd say that's like big picture, kind of one of the more important things that I'm doing.
Right, and then you have to not only convince that talent, but then you have to make sure that the talent is gonna convey that information
Yep,
properly because
exactly.
part of advanced analytics, and this is something I use in my personal writing, is like you have like the softwares are out there even for the public, like covering the NFL. There's PFF, there's Next Gen Stats, like
Yep.
there's Pro Football Reference, like there are softwares where NFL.com you can get these NFL Pro. I'm thinking of all these or off the top of my head. It's just there are so many softwares for each individual sport where you could get these advanced analytics, but it's all about how to use them and when to use them. And I found that story about how she texted you like, hey, I need this stat right now, or like something like
Mhm.
that, like as a hypothetical scenario. So it kind of just makes me think like, how much do you have to adjust on the fly? Because I'm sure
Oh yeah.
obviously you have prep segments and you have a good understanding of the way the show is going to go, but obviously an argument or a conversation could start up or a topic is brought up and I'm sure you need to adjust on the fly. I've spoken with a few people working with like ESPN apps and ESPN producers. But from your standpoint, how many adjustments do you guys have to make on the fly over the course of a show to make sure that the talent is getting the information that they need to convey live on the show?
Yeah, that's without question the hardest part of my job. Some days it's none, some days it's a lot. Like even the whole show. You remember when Kyrie requested the trade? I
Yeah,
guess maybe a year and a half ago by now.
yeah.
Uh, that happened around 11 a.m. Pacific time. We go on at noon Pacific time. So everything we had done in the show, and we did all sorts of stuff. I think it was like Michael Jordan's birth. There was some Michael Jordan element we were going to do. I don't know if it was his birthday or some anniversary of something he did, and everything was out the window. The whole hour that we had planned, done. We didn't do a single bit of it. It was everything on the fly, reacting to what this means for Kyrie, what teams could be available, what does this mean for Kevin Durant. Obviously, he ended up requesting a trade as well very soon after, and that's one of those things where we were all there for 4 hours already. We had a whole plan, and if he didn't request a trade, we would have done a completely different show. So that's the hardest thing we do. And then also, yeah, like you said, I had one last year where Perk asked me something about. He basically asked it on air. Hey, our Schwartz, our researcher, what does De'Aaron Fox do? Something about him against the Lakers, and it was, oh boy, I got to find this real quick because I basically had to find it until
And then
before
called out national television. Yeah.
exactly called out on national television. So I had to find it, tell the producer. We have a system. I call them McCurdy. That I can talk to the producer. The producer then has a direct line to them into his ear, and was able to say it as we were going off in the segment. I was told Stuart Scott used to be famous for asking just completely random stuff, and the researcher would be like, "What? What is that?" And then he would, the way Stuart Scott would find some way to just magically weave it all together. So yeah, that's the definitely the hardest part of my job, or like a pronunciation. We certainly get a lot of those, especially for the non NFL NBA type of sports, or even in those sports if it's kind of a lesser known, newer type player. And yeah, sometimes I mean that's honestly the biggest frustration. I'll be asked something in the middle of the segment that is maybe it's a 10-minute thing to look up, and I don't have 10 minutes. I have like 3 minutes. So you just kind of have to give them the best you can in that situation. It's like, man, I was sitting there all morning. Like, you couldn't have asked me this at 10 o'clock. Then I could have easily given you a good answer. But yeah, that's like the think on your feet. Cause like, as you're building the graphics, and like we have a whole team, I think we have like 50 researchers. So like there's always people you can ask if you want to brainstorm or whatnot. Like if you have time, this job is manageable. But then it's, yeah, those times when you need something in that second, and you have like a minute and a half, or even there's times like a producer will ask for a graphic at the beginning of the segment. And sometimes it is a situation like the Kyrie where you're reacting to something in real time, like especially the late night sports center. If you're coming off a Laker game or a Warrior game, especially back in the day when the Warriors were the main show, you need to come up with something real fast, and that's just kind of the part of night sports center. You're constantly going to be reacting to whatever's going on. So on NBA Today and Countdown, we don't have that as much. Obviously, like everything had already happened the night before on NBA Today. So, but every once in a while you get news like that Kyrie trade situation, and certainly like our trade deadline show where it's just kind of a constant stream of news happening and reacting to that news. Yeah, that's definitely the hardest thing. Being able to think on your feet, even honestly knowing what I can do in 2 minutes and what I would only be able to do in 10 minutes. So if I don't have 10 minutes, pivoting to something else.
Right. Like not trying to find information that may not be as great in 2 minutes as opposed to,
Right.
like, finding a better, maybe not as good fact instead of a kind of like, if you can't give the full 10 minutes, don't try to find that fact. So obviously prioritizing is
Right.
gonna be huge, and I
Right.
know that
Yep.
behind the scenes, you guys do so much work making those shows happen. Are there any on-air talents? And I know obviously I'm sure a lot of the people there obviously are great, and that's why everyone watches them, but is there an on-air talent specifically that you admire in a sense for how great he or she does on the air and how easy they are to work with and just the type of person who is not only so great on camera but also off the camera as well. Name some of those people for me if you don't mind at ESPN that you
Yeah.
work with that you think are so great.
I mean, since I not to talk about anyone I'm working with currently, but honestly, Neil Everett is incredible. Just the nicest guy. Like he even my grandpa was at the last Cubs World Series game before 2016, back in the 40s, which is kind of crazy. So I just casually said it in the newsroom one day, and he did his whole lead around it, and he was asking me for like pictures of him and my grandma, who sadly passed away about 12 years ago by now. But he did a whole personal thing, and he always tried to like really get to know everyone and do different kind of personal things like that for the whole staff, and is was just a absolutely brilliant writer. And but probably did have a few of those random questions that you don't know how he's gonna what's he doing with this, and then all of a sudden you hear him on air. It's like, oh wow, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I see why he needed that. So he was great. I worked with Rachel Nichols for closely for I guess 5 years, and always really enjoyed her. She always had our backs, and she did that monologue at the beginning of every show. So some days I wouldn't be involved with it at all, but other days she'd ask all sorts of questions about it, and if nothing else, always fact checking it was an important thing. And so she's another person who I definitely enjoyed working with. But I mean, everyone's great. Other people here, I know I mentioned Shanae earlier. I'd say she's one of the people who um, I spend the most time with, just as far as, she definitely wants our stuff and wants to use it and in a smart way on air, and certainly leans into that as a Stanford alum, that kind of theme.
That's amazing. Now, I do want to break down something that you did mention earlier, something you experimented with a little bit when you blogged for the Phoenix Suns, and obviously something you deal with now, and different ways to convey advanced analytics and stats. And I think in today's world of AI and all these different advancements in analytics and technology, it's become more than ever where now I feel like you can know how different basketball players tie their shoes at this point. It's kind of
Yeah.
getting out of hand, but in the best way possible because we're really learning exactly what is going on, the fundamentals that these players follow to be so successful, and things that you can't even see with the eye test or things you wouldn't notice that these advanced analytics are able to figure out. How have you been able to incorporate advanced analytics in your work while also trying to make it understandable for the on-air talent and for the viewer, as we were kind of talking about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost my main job. Like to me, what's incredible, when I started at ESPN in 2014, it was offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency that was hard to even get them to say at times, where they'd
Wow.
want to just go to points per game. And I feel like now we're at a point where it's just understood that that's what's better.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
so
crazy. I'm like, that was hard. I mean,
yeah.
I feel like it's just like a saying, like offensive efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah, no, now it is. Now it is. And even probably for the last 5 years it is. But in 2014, at least for me, it certainly wasn't.
Mhm.
And it was that was one of those things where you need to get them to understand it. But honestly, even I had a senior leader last year at ESPN basically say like, what the hell is this offensive efficiency? and obviously not someone necessarily like at the time super locked into NBA, but I had to be like, come on, man, like that's just
Come
it's a
around
pretty
to the
common
times,
thing.
like, welcome to 2024, yeah.
Exactly. Like sometimes I'd want to be like bullet it and say what it is. And honestly, there probably are. I mean, I know we aren't exactly a good test audience for that. Like for us, that's just part of the vernacular. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who watch the NBA who don't know it. Just casual type fans who maybe don't. So I mean, I'd say the number one thing is always trying to explain what things are, being as simple as possible. Like I'll give you one. We work with Second Spectrum. Are you familiar with them?
Yes, I am a little bit familiar, yeah.
Okay. So they do the advanced tracking. They've got the cameras in the ceiling, and I mean it's just absolutely unbelievable the kind of stuff that they can do. But they call some of their stats QSQ and QSI, and it's QSQ is quantified shot probability. And really, what it is saying is just what is the chances that an average player makes a shot. Kind of tells you like what kind of shots a guy's taking. So like Jamal Crawford would have like the worst rating in this because he takes really tough shots or used to. And then like DeAndre Jordan would have the best because
Right.
DeAndre Jordan is only taking shots at the basket. So it's actually like if you think about it and like have it explained to you, it's actually a really simple stat. And then the QSI one is just basically how much better are you shooting than average. So like Stephen Curry certainly takes on the tougher end of shots for an average shooter, and he is obviously making them at a much more successful clip than an average shooter. So like his QSI might be much higher. So like when you think about it and break it down, these are not that complicated of stats. But if you just see QSQ on the screen and they wrote it with like a small q first, like it's just tough to convey. So again, like an awesome metric. It's just an incredible metric. Definitely not throwing any shade at it, but I just always wish we could call it something different. And even now, like if we use it, we would just kind of call it, try to say shot probability type of thing, you know?
Mhm.
And just, yeah, that's the biggest thing. And certainly like on, sometimes things with on pick plays, like the way it's labeled, it's sometimes it's like direct picks and then picks. And direct pick is again, it's actually very simple. It just means there's an action attached to it. There's a shot, there's a turnover, there's a foul, there's something like that that happens. Whereas a normal pick includes that and also includes a pick where nothing happens on the play and they just kind of reset it. So that's really the biggest challenge is making it simple enough because I work closely with Malika Andrews now. Like there'll be times she'll basically be like, "What is this? What are you doing?" And I'll have to explain it to her so she can then explain it. And sometimes we might decide what I did was a little bit too ambitious and we should simplify it a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely a dance that you often do because at the same time, like we want to be doing that kind of stuff. Like we want to be known as the smart basketball show and the place where you get those kind of things. Like our coordinating producer always wants to surprise the viewer and things like that. So we definitely want to push the envelope to some degree, but like for me, it's like got to do it in a smart way and can't do it in a way that sounds like gobbledygook. So yeah, we've got incredible tools, and then it's just finding the best way to utilize them.
You describe those stats so well, it's almost like you do it for a living.
Yeah,
It's just it's just funny though because it's like you're right. Even for me, I didn't know what that stat meant, and you simplified that so much to the point where I can understand that. The problem is you don't have that kind of time on the air, so I can understand what kind of challenge it is, how you try to juggle both sides, kind of being that smart show, but also making it understandable for the average viewer that may be viewing.
yeah.
Michael, this has been amazing. Obviously, you've achieved so much. What would be your key piece of advice to an aspiring sports broadcaster hoping to get to the point that you're at now?
I would say just try a lot of different things. Like when I was certainly when I was in high school, but even when I was in college, and really even when I was doing my blog, I had no idea there was a ESPN Stats and Information Group or a group that does this work. I mean, I guess it makes sense that there'd be people who are coming up with all these stats, but I feel like, and now especially with AI, like there's so many jobs that we don't even know about. I'm sure the job that you're doing, that you'll be doing in 10, 15 years might be something that's not even around, at least in its current form.
Right.
So I think like just experiment as much as you can, see what you like, see what you don't like, try to take advantage of as many experiences as you can. So like for me, that was at the university level, that was the college media. So obviously, like my bread and butter was the Daily Wildcat, but I also had a TV show. It was something that three friends of mine and we had a class together before lunchtime. We'd always go to lunch, and then we'd always be yelling at each other about sports. And this girl who sat there one day was like, "Hey, you guys are kind of entertaining. I don't know what you're talking about, but just the way we would argue with each other was entertaining." And it was one of the guys was the school radio director, and then me and one other guy worked for the newspaper, and another guy just had great takes. So we were like, okay, sure, yeah, that would be fun. And to me, that was just kind of like a extra thing I did with my friends once a week. And then I get to the ESPN job interview, and they said, "Have you ever worked with a rundown? Have you ever done anything with TV?" And I was able to say, like, I mean, obviously on a way more primitive level than ESPN, but yeah, I had done that for 3 years, and I did have some experience, coming up with interesting things to say for TV. So, I mean, having this is that's incredible for you. Like, you're obviously getting so much experience, but
Thank you.
just do as many different things as you can. Meet as many people that could possibly be allies for you, so you aren't all of a sudden 22 and just trying to kind of fake it at that point. Have the authentic relationships built, as well as the skills and the experience of knowing kind of what lane you like.
Michael Schwartz, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. We talked about so many great things that you do in your job. I'm so happy we were able to have this discussion, and I know the audience, I'm sure, enjoyed all the great things you had to say. Michael, we really appreciate you coming on today.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad you were able to join us today. For the audience, I hope you guys did enjoy, alongside a huge stats and information researcher for ESPN on some of their biggest shows. We're talking NBA Today, NBA Countdown, Sports Center, and so much more. To the right of your screen is Michael Schwartz, and to the left of your screen is your host Chase Coburn. And we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.